In this video, we will learn how we can use the analytical techniques to test certain hypotheses related to the human resource management. So, hypothesis testing is primarily a testing process in analytics, wherein we compute statistics in sample data and make conclusion or form opinion about the population data. Sample data is nothing but a subset of population data. Um, why do we work with sample data? Why don't we directly work with population data? Well, the importance of sample data in analytics is due to the fact that it's computationally more efficient, because when you work with the small data, it's better. You can handle it in a better way. Moreover, it is practically impossible to collect data for the entire population. So we work with sample data. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is that I'll take a couple of important hypotheses that any HR manager would like to know for internal strategy purposes. So I'll take a data set, a sample data set for this, and then we will test a couple of hypotheses that will help an HR management, HR manager take more informed decision, or a decision that is based on robust analytical output. So one of the question that comes to mind for any HR manager is that how does the employee performance level differs across job profiles? That means can we conclude that a particular job profile is doing better? So is it the junior people who are on average doing better than the senior people, or junior middle management and the senior management? So how is the performance differing across different job profiles? So that's the first HR related questions that come to the mind. And then another question that also is very important is, does performance differs with gender? So is the male population, the male employees are doing better than the female employees? So is that something happening? So that's another questions. So another question could be like, does increase in experience necessarily increase the performance? So that's very important, because what happens is that if experience is increasing and the employee performance is not increasing at that rate, then it's detrimental to the company. So the company could think of laying off a certain number of senior employees who are not very productive as per their experience. So it is important to know whether increase in experience actually increase performance or not. And then finally, we will also like to know that how does a single year of extra experience increases somebody's performance? So again, that depends on the third hypothesis, whether increase in experience increases performance or not. If that is true, then to what extent, how do we quantify it? To what extent it impacts performance? Okay, so for example, if you want to compare two employees, somebody having 5-year experience, other one will having 6-year experience. So how can we compare that, their respective performance level? Okay, so all these hypotheses can be tested using a sample data set, and we can make a conclusion based on the population data. So population data mean the entire group of employees. Okay, say for example, if you're working, if you're doing a study for any IT company, say Infosys, which has got like 1.5 lakh employees, you cannot do a study on 1.5 lakh observations because it's difficult to collect data. So one can go ahead with a few hundreds of observations, and then do the analysis, and then based on the analysis, based on the statistical testing or hypothesis testing, one would conclude one will come up with the conclusion based on the study. So what are the techniques to be used for this discussion? Well, I'll be using very simple techniques. So first one is the basic descriptive statistics, which we usually do for any kind of modeling. I'll also use the t-test for sample mean comparison purpose. So it should be mean comparison. And I'll also use linear regression. Remember that HR analytics is fairly new, so we do not have any standard techniques specifically used for HR analytics. So usually we use most of the simple techniques like simple linear regression, multiple linear regression, logistic regression, factor analysis, clustering, hypothesis testing to do HR analytics. As such, there is no statistical test or statistical method which is totally concentrated on the HR analytics. Unlike in many other form of analytics like marketing and financial analytics, where a lot of the techniques are primarily created by researcher for that domain only, but unfortunately we don't have that kind of techniques in analytics. So let us learn how the data looks like. Well, the data has got 4 variables, 5 in fact. The name of the data is employee. I have got the employee ID, the number of years of experience, job profile, the performance rating, and the gender. Gender 1 is women, gender 2 is male. And I've got 2 profiles, one and 2. So one is the junior profile and the 2 is the senior profile. So what kind of data we have? Well, experience is a continuous data. Rating is also a continuous data. Whereas profile and gender both are class variables, right? They are not continuous variables. And ID is just an unique ID. We're not going to use it as a variable that explain something. So that's just a unique ID. Before we do any analysis, it's always good. So good practice to do to start with the descriptive statistics. In fact, the hypothesis that we have already created for us will be more clear to us once we get to know the simple statistics about our data. Okay, because sometimes we may need to change the hypothesis itself. So to get more clarity on our data, we actually need to do the base. We should actually find out the basic statistic first. So we will calculate the mean and the standard deviations, minimum and maximum. These 4-5 things are very important for the 2 continuous variables, and we will do that with respect to the class variables. Okay, so first thing we will do is we'll calculate the average values, average rating for with respect to the profiles, and you can see in the output that the average rating for profile 1 is 3.33 and the average rating for profile 2 is 3.6. Similarly, the standard deviation is 0.62 in profile 1 and 0.51 in profile 2, and the minimum and maximum. Now looking at the data, we cannot conclude anything. Okay, if somebody asks you that what is the average performance of employee belonging to profile 1, can you say that it's 3.33? No, that's actually not true, because this is a sample data and we haven't done any hypothesis testing yet. Only after doing hypothesis testing we'll get to know whether the sample statistic represents the population statistic or not. Okay, so we'll get to know that only after doing the test. Similarly, we cannot do we cannot conclude anything about the different statistics of for profile 2 as well. Okay, but at least by looking at the data, sorry, looking at the output from the proc means, we can come up with even more number of hypotheses. For example, we can also think of finding out whether the average performance of profile 2 is greater than average performance of profile 1. So that could be one hypothesis. Another hypothesis could be, you can see the standard deviation of profile 1 is actually greater than standard deviation of profile 2. So what does standard deviation mean? Well, standard deviation mean there is a lot of variation. Okay, so the variation in data in profile 1 is much more than the variation in profile 2. Okay, and what does variation actually talk about? Well, the variation in data is actually an important aspect of data, because what happens is that there could be employees which are like which are having uh, very bad rating, and there would be employees which are having very good rating. So the variation is quite high. Okay, whereas in the profile 2, most of the people or most of the employees are having rating very close to each other. So the variation in the rating for profile 2 employees is not much. Okay, so is it true? Can we conclude it? Like whatever we discussed now. Okay, can we conclude that the variation in the rating in the profile 1 employees is greater than that of profile 2? We cannot say that. For these things, we need to do hypothesis testing. So now we can see that we have come up with another 2 hypotheses. So similarly, we can we can generate as many hypotheses as possible. It is always good to have more number of hypotheses, so that we will get a better understanding about the population, and based on the outcome of the hypothesis testing, we can take very important strategic decisions. And that will obviously improve the performance of the HR managers. Okay. Okay. So next thing is that we will see how the average value, the average rating is with respect to the gender. Okay. So for female it's 3.69, for male it's 3.1. The variation is 0.61 in the case of female. The variation is 0.2 in the case of male. Okay, and again we cannot conclude anything. And similarly, we can also form 2 more hypotheses over here, the way we have done in the previous case. Okay, so the next thing we will do is we will do the hypothesis testing. Just to give a very brief background of what hypothesis testing is all about. Hypothesis testing is a statistical testing using which we actually confirm something. Okay, we think or we feel that there is some pattern, or there is some quantity that we know about the sample that holds true also for the population, but we cannot say that for sure. Okay, hypothesis testing is used to confirm that the sample statistic represents the population statistics. Okay, so whatever study we're doing with a few hundred employee observations actually represents the entire population and the whole number of employees. It could be in thousands or lakhs. If you're not sure about, if you're not familiar with hypothesis testing, I suggest you to go through the hypothesis testing video on my channel, Analytics University, where you'll get to know what hypothesis testing is all about and how can you do that. Okay, so the first hypothesis testing that we're going to do is that we just want to know whether the average rating for all employees is 3.5, because we have seen that the rating actually ranges from 2.5 to 4.5. So is it that the average rating of the organization is 3.5? Okay, so how do we do that? We will use proc t test for that. Okay, so before doing the proc test, let me also explain that like what are the two different types of hypothesis we always see. First hypothesis is that we call it as null hypothesis. So the null hypothesis, we assume that the assumed value is true. So assumed value, that means the average value is assumed to be 3.5 here. Okay, and we believe that that's true. So we call it as null hypothesis. And we have an alternative hypothesis. Okay, so the alternative hypothesis is that the assumed value is not close to the population statistic, or the null hypothesis is not true. So that's why it's known as alternative hypothesis. So based on some test statistics, we are going to select either null hypothesis or the alternate hypothesis. Okay, so that we have just uh, two options to choose: null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. Based on the t statistics, we are going to do that. And to know what is t statistic, what is t testing, uh, I will suggest you to go to the t-testing theory. So the syntax is like this: proc test data employee, and we mentioned the null hypothesis over here. The null hypothesis is that the mean or the average value of rating of the entire population is 3.5. Okay, so how do we know that average value of rating is there? Well, we use the variable in the keyword var, and the variable used here is rating. So automatically it assumes that we are doing hypothesis testing for average rating. Okay, and when we run this, we'll get values like this. Okay, so we will get the number of observations, the mean, standard deviation, all the statistics, followed by the confidence interval. But the most important thing is the t-value and the p-value. Okay, I look at the p-value most of the times. You can also use t-value to come up with a conclusion, but I look at p-value. So how do we interpret? Okay, how do we interpret the p-value? Okay, so the interpretation of p-value in this case is pretty much similar to what we have seen in other modeling techniques. If the p-value is greater than 0.05, if the p-value is greater than 0.05, so remember it correctly, because it could be confusing many times. So if the p-value is greater than 0.05, so 0.05 is because we are doing it as at a 95% confidence level. If the p-value is greater than 0.05, we accept the null hypothesis. If it is less than 0.05, we reject the null hypothesis. Okay, so that's the way we need to choose the hypothesis. The hypothesis. Okay, we in the output we will also get to see the normal probability curve for the t-test. So it shows the t-test like to what extent it get it acceptable or rejectable. So if you're familiar with the t-test, you'll be in a better position to interpret the normal probability curve. Okay, but what is more important in this output is to look at the p-value. Okay, looking at the p-value, we can actually come up with a conclusion about the t-test. So here what we have done is that we have accepted the null hypothesis and rejected the alternative hypothesis. Okay, so since we have accepted the null hypothesis, we assume that the sample statistic which is or the assumed value, where the assumed value is that on an average the rating for the entire population is 3.5. It holds true for the population, and we have accepted that. Okay, now we can conclude that the average rating of the entire company is close to 3.5. We can say it for sure because the hypothesis testing confirms that. Okay, we will do another hypothesis testing here. We'll try to find out the difference in the average rating. So difference in the average rating of male to female and between job profile 1 and job profile 2. So here the null hypothesis is the mean of rating of male minus the mean of rating of female is equal to 0. That means, is there a difference between the average rating of male and female? Okay, and the alternative, of course, it's non-zero. That means there is a difference. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, the syntax remains same, except the fact that now we are going to use a variable known as a keyword known as class. Okay, so the class variable here is gender. Now let us run this. Okay. Before we look at the other statistics, well, let us look at the normal probability curve. Well, that's important here because we can get to see that the difference in the distribution of the data for the two different types, male and female, is totally different. For example, you can see that the female population is very well spread, whereas the male population is not very well spread. Okay, so there seems to be a difference, but is there a difference between the average value or the mean value? Okay, we'll get to know that by looking at the p-value. Okay, so look at the p-value, but one of the important thing over here to consider is that there are two p-values over here. Okay, last time we saw only one p-value, but when you take difference of two values and do a statistical testing, we could get two p-values. Okay, the two p-values are actually calculated by using two different methods. Okay, and the choice of method depends on the actual variance of the data. So if it is assumed that the variance of the male population and the female population is same, we use what is known as the pooled method, and if it is not same, we use a different method, something that is a bit difficult to pronounce, but yeah, it is yeah, you can pronounce, you can help me. Okay, so this is the one. So now look at the p-values over here. Now both the p-value says that we should actually reject the null hypothesis. Okay, so the null hypothesis says that the average value or the average rating is same, or the difference is 0, and we have rejected it. So what will we accept? We will accept the alternative hypothesis, which says that the average rating with respect to the gender is different. Okay, or the difference between the average rating of male population to female population is non-zero. Okay, so that is accepted now. Now we can conclude that for the entire population also. Okay, so that's the way the hypothesis testing is done, and we can come up with so many other hypothesis testing. This is just an example, and we can do the testing for all these things. Okay, this is a simple way of analyzing your data and coming up with very powerful and important conclusions. Remember, one thing here is that the techniques used in HR analytics are primarily very simple in nature, and the only important thing here is that to come up with better hypothesis, because there is no complexity in terms of finding out techniques, but it is more important to find out important hypotheses that can be tested. Okay, that's where the HR domain knowledge is very important. So the professionals from HR background need to find out, like, what are the typical HR related questions that one would come across. So more and more number of hypotheses can be found out by having a discussion with the HR managers. Now the next important thing that we are going to do here is to find out the causal impact. Okay, so that's the next goal. Okay, now we have been able to answer two of our hypotheses, but another two are left. Okay, so what are so far we have seen that the two hypotheses. Let me go to the hypothesis again. Now we know two things here. So first question that we ask ourselves: how does performance level differs across job profiles? Okay, so we have seen that it well, we haven't seen that yet. We have actually checked for gender. We haven't seen that for profile. Okay, let us run it for profile. Yeah, so this is the difference between the average rating of employees with respect to the gender. Okay, so the null hypothesis is that, sorry, with respect to the profile, job profile, the null hypothesis is that the two job profiles perform similarly, or there is no difference. That's the null hypothesis. The alternative hypothesis that the performance level differs. Okay, and the p-value is actually greater than 0.05. So we conclude that performance level actually don't differ across job profile. They're pretty much same. Okay, so that's what we can conclude for the whole population. Okay, so that's the answer to the first question that we asked. The next question was, does performance level differ across gender? Yes, it does differ. Okay, but it doesn't differ with respect to job profiles. Okay, and we have seen that now. The next question is, does increase in experience increase performance? Okay, for that we need to build a causal model, and we will be using the linear regression for this. Before using linear regression, it is good to do the correlation check, because correlation is the first step towards regression, and it gives a very good idea about about the relations between the variables, and we can actually fine tune the hypothesis based on the correlation. So let us find out the correlation between the two variables, rating and experience. Okay, now you can see that the correlation is 0.4. Okay, the correlation is 0.4. So 0.4 correlation is not much. So and we were actually expecting better correlation, because rating the performance actually increases with experience, right? Generally that is what is expected. Okay, so we would expect a better correlation or higher correlation. So let us see, so we can actually ask ourselves that does it also change with respect to the job profile? Like for job profile 1, maybe we have a better correlation, and job profile 2 we have a different correlation. So that could be the case. So let us do that. So let us calculate correlation with respect to the profile. So as expected, that's what we can see, that the correlation is now 0.89. So now this is significantly higher. Now why is that so? Because in profile 1, which is the junior most profile, with increase in experience, the average performance is or the performance is actually increasing, okay, at a very fast rate, right? That's why the correlation is 0.9, close to 0.9. Okay, but for senior professional, an extra year of experience doesn't really increase the performance rating that much. Okay, it does increase to some extent, but it doesn't increase to the extent that happens for the junior employees. Okay, and we can also see the plot in order to understand it better. Now the next question is the next two questions. In order to answer the next two questions, we cannot do anything or we cannot conclude anything looking at the correlation. So we need to do the regression because using regression we can explain or we can quantify the relationship and the corresponding increase. So we will regress rating, performance rating, and we will, which is going to be our dependent variable, and experience, which is going to be our independent variable. Okay, so we want to know how experience impacts rating or performance level. Okay, so we will perform a simple linear regression. So remember that we have only one variable here, so this is a simple linear regression. So let us run this. So in a simple linear regression, we need to know what is the R square, what is the intercept and the coefficient, the intercept and the slope coefficient, right? So the R square in this case is 0.12, sorry, 0.16. So it's not very good though, but still okay. If we increase the number of observation, it is going to improve, or probably increase the number of variables is going to improve the R square value also. The intercept is 3.05, and the slope coefficient is 0.05. Okay, and the p value for intercept is 0.001, less than 0.001. That means the intercept is significant, whereas the slope coefficient for the variable independent variable experience is 0.12. Okay, sorry, the slope coefficient for the variable independent variable experience is 0.05, but the p value, the corresponding p value is 0.12. Now the p value has to be less than 0.05 for the coefficients to be significant. And what does significance mean? That means it is different than 0, or it's a non-zero value, or something that can be explained. We can explain it. Okay, if it is 0, there is no point in explaining. It's as good as without a coefficient, right? So we always expect the p values to be less than 0.05, but here in this case it's greater than 0.05. That means we can conclude here that on the population, when we do regression on the population on the entire sample, not the population, and the entire sample, we find that there is no relationship, causal relationship between the performance level and experience. That's when experience doesn't impact performance level, right? This sounds a bit different. We have seen a different situation when we did correlation analysis. Now in the regression, we are finding something different. We expected experience to impact the performance level. We expected the coefficient of experience to be significant in this model, but it happens to be non-significant value. So why is that so? Can we modify the model a little bit? Okay. What we will do is that we will add one more variable. Okay, so let us add profile here, over here. Okay, and let us run the regression again. Probably that will give a better insight, and our confusion probably will be clear that why is it so. We expected that to happen, but it's not happening. So let us see the results. Well, you can see that now experience is almost significant, if not very significant. It's 0.05. The p value has improved drastically, right? As you can see. So earlier it was 0.12. Now it is very close to 0.05. Although we still expect this coefficient or the p values to be, less than 0.05. And so adding another variable, the variable profile, has improved the coefficient of experience, or has improved the clarity of relationship between experience and performance rating. Why is that so? So we could think of this situation like this, that the relationship between performance level and experience, as we have already seen even in the correlation analysis, is different in different job profiles. Okay, so if you pool the data, if you together do the regression, well, the relationship will not be very significantly known or very clearly known. Okay, so it is important to segregate the data and do the regression again, and we'll have more clarity about the relationship between experience and performance rating. So for that, what we will do is that we will do two regressions. Okay, one for profile 1 and one with data profile 2. Okay, so we will do it for profile 1 employees, and let us run the regression. Let us straight go to the p-values. Now you can see the p-value is less than 0.05. Okay, that means the coefficient for experience in this case is significant. Okay, now remember, this regression is run only on profile 1 employees. Okay, so in the profile 1 employees, which were the junior employees, the performance rating is directly related to experience. Okay, and it is significant, and we can conclude that for the population as well. Okay, and we do not know how it is related for profile 2. We need to do another regression. Okay, but for profile 1 we are for sure that it is directly related. Why it is directly related? Because the coefficient is positive, right? The coefficient is positive, so increase in experience increases the performance level. Okay, the slope coefficient for experience is positive. That's why we see that there is a direct relationship or a positive relationship, okay, between experience and performance rating. Now, but our question was, an extra year of experience increases your performance rating by how much? Okay, so an extra year of experience of an employee increase the performance rating by 0.501. So how do we know that? Well, mathematically, if you take the first derivative of the dependent variable with respect to the independent variable, you will find it to be 0.5. So which means change in experience will increase the will correspond to the change in rating by 0.5. Or in more layman term, we can say that an extra year of increase in experience increase the performance rating by the slope coefficient value, and the slope coefficient value is 0.5, right? So now we have got answer to the third question as well. Now let us also do the same thing with profile 2. Now looking at the p-value, we can see that it's greater than 0.05. That means it's not a significant value. Okay, so the slope coefficient for experience here is not significant. That means there is no point interpreting that variable. Or we can conclude that in the profile 2 population, in the profile 2 sample, the performance rating is not at all related to the number of years of experience. So whether more number of year experience or less number of year experience, it doesn't really affect the performance level. Why? Because the p-value is greater than 0.05. Okay, so it has to be less than 0.05 in order for this coefficient to be significant, and hence the relationship between experience and performance level. But that's not happening here. Okay, so now we have got answers to all our questions, and once you have done the hypothesis testing, the linear regression analysis, we should be able to answer the 4 questions that we asked in the beginning. Okay, so remember one thing here, that this study is done on sample data, and we have we are concluding for the population data. So it's important to be very careful, given the fact that there could be there could be cases where it works for sample but doesn't work for population. And since we're taking a decision on this, one has to be very careful in terms of doing statistical tests. So no conclusion should be made by looking at simply the descriptive statistic, the correlation. We need to do hypothesis testing in order to come up with the conclusion. Thank you.